Hello, I'm Dr. Joel Domingo with City University, and in this video, I'm going to be covering the idea of aligning things together, the topic, problem, purpose, research questions, and methodology. Now, in a previous residency, many of you were introduced to this idea of alignment. You explored the 15-point prospectus tool and talked a little bit in terms of what the dissertation is, what an applied versus basic dissertation, and the dissertation sequence. I'm going to go more into detail specifically about this idea of alignment because I can't stress enough how important aligning your ideas together are, because that flow, if you will, of ideas is going to be the key to a successful dissertation. So what I want to do is talk specifically about how you connect the concepts of topic, problem, purpose, and research questions together. All right, can't stress enough this word about alignment, and this is a tire. And this tire, if you notice, and I recently got my tires changed, and so I figure this analogy is apt. If you look at the tread pattern, the tire portion of the outer tire here, this is looking at it from the front, is worn out versus the inner portion. Well, that's because the camber was off in the tire, meaning that the tire was misaligned or misinstalled a little bit and was wobbly every time you drove it. So over time, the wear on the tire is not as even as it should be. Therefore, the tire was misaligned. So another analogy in another video, I shared the picture of a airplane or a ship or whatnot, and talked about what alignment versus misalignment is, and you get the idea. So again, that was Residency 1. Here in Residency 2, we're talking a little bit more specifically about alignment. Now, first and foremost, and probably the most important thing you want to look at, is the Prospectus Checklist. The Prospectus Checklist is a resource for you that I encourage you to look at. It is part of the dissertation guide. It's in there. It's also on the dissertation student shell, which all dissertation students receive. Handy tool. In fact, you will turn in, of course, after 694A, it's expected that you get your prospectus approved. You want to look at the prospectus components and make sure that your ideas from component 1 to component 15 are aligned, especially the problem, purpose, research questions, methodology, design, etc. All right, let's review the problem statement and research problem. If you recall in Residency 1, we spent a lot of time talking about what the problem statement is and what's the topic of your research. To remind you, remember that a research problem, usually written in the form of a problem statement on a dissertation, is this. It represents a clear problem in the field as evidenced by the literature. In other words, the research problem is not just a problem you think of as a problem. It is documented. There's evidence showing that other researchers have studied this issue, and it's a problem, okay? The way you write it in the form of a problem statement, it should be succinct. It should not carry on for pages. It should just be succinct. The problem is X. A good research problem is not too large in scope. Don't try to save the world. Again, if you want to end world hunger, if you want to create world peace, those are great things to aspire for, but it's too large in scope. You cannot boil the ocean. So, don't make it too large in scope, but it cannot be too small in scope. In other words, let's look at 5 English-speaking left-handed employees at the JLD company. No, that's too small. It's too narrow. What does that have to do with the bigger issues of, let's say, English translation, for example, if that was the problem? All right? It should be unique, meaningful, and dissertation-worthy. And again, the word dissertation-worthy means that it adds to the literature. All right? In a previous residency, I also talked about linking things together and how to narrow your topic down to the research question. And I gave this example of remote technologies on education, the lack of students in distance classes, to study why students don't attend distance education classes, and then the research question. Now, if you carefully look at this slide, you will see that each idea is linked. What's that common link that ties it together? That link is called alignment. All right? So, just a review for you. Now, remember that the research questions if you look at the bottom, they flow out of the methodology and design, which flows out of the purpose statement, which flows out of the problem statement, which comes from your topic. So look at this graphic here on the right of the slide. The topic is this and the problem is this. Once you have that, then the purpose of your study is to what? It's the verb. It's to investigate, to understand, it's to explore in order to address the problem above. Now, you can't jump to your methodology without having those first two. So once you have your purpose, now you could talk about using a specific methodology and design will help the researcher by what's the verb that's related to the previous verb. If it was to understand, it's to explore, etc. So again, there's a link between the second and third, which are linked to the first. Everything is tied together. There's a thread, if you will, that goes from your topic to your purpose to your methodology and design, and finally to the research questions. The research questions are based on the methodology. Let me give you an example. Let's say you wanted to look at 6th grade test scores, and the methodology is looking at the standardized test and see if there are variances in the outcomes of those tests. Now, if the research question is to find out how students felt about taking the test, you are misaligned, because if your methodology is quantitative and you start asking a qualitative question and you get interview data, that is misalignment, and it does not flow, and it does not link, and it is not aligned. So again, I can't stress enough the word alignment in this phase of the dissertation. Remember the purpose statement tips. Why are you doing the study? Remember the purpose of the study is to, what's that verb? Identify, explore, understand, etc. Those are typically qualitative studies. If it's to identify a relationship, association, if it's to predict, if it's to determine, usually those are quantitative studies, in this case correlational studies. Maybe the purpose is to establish, maybe the purpose is to assess. Those are different types of studies. So again, the type of verb you use on the purpose tends to hint toward what type of methodology and design you're going to use. How will you address the research problem? Through the research questions. And remember, research questions, they guide the data collection. In qualitative studies, those research questions are not the same as an interview question. Those are different. Typically in qualitative studies, you will have a research question, but then within the idea of the research question, you will have 3 to 4, 3 to 5 interview questions that all fall under that idea of that research question. That's what it means by having your questions align. The most common problem with research questions is that they are not aligned with the problem statement. Again, to go back to that example, if you're looking at 6th grade test scores and that data, but then you're going to interview students, well, that's not the right type of research question for the problem. You want to be clear and to the point how the questions will be answered, whether you use quantitative methods or qualitative methods, or even mixed methods, you want to be clear. Now, if I see on a dissertation that this is a qualitative dissertation, but then there's a hypothesis, then I know something is awry and misaligned there. Vice versa, if I have a qualitative problem, like let's say I want to address the perceptions of employees at a company, but then I start talking about an engagement inventory and the survey data, well, that isn't necessarily aligned either. So it goes both ways. Just remember, everything must align. Let me give you an example here. And this is a real life example. I just changed the name a little bit. The specific leadership problem is that often HR leaders don't consider individual drivers of engagement when developing and implementing organizational engagement strategies. Therefore, the purpose of this qualitative phenomenological study was to explore the role of cultural values, attitudes, beliefs, etc., and work experiences of Whovians employed at a major global specialty retailer. Qualitative phenomenological research methods were selected to support, etc., etc. And then finally, the research question, how do Whovian employees at a major global specialty retailer describe their personal employee engagement experience. Now, I want you to notice how each of these things, the problem, the purpose, the methods, design, and the research questions are aligned. There is a common thread that when the words are used correctly, you will see that clearly, and that's what your chair is looking for when you're working on dissertation alignment. That's what you'll be doing throughout your dissertation, especially during your prospectus and your proposal phase. So let me sum it up by saying here, problem statements. Make sure they're clear, concise, limited in scope. Don't try to solve the problem for the whole world. Make sure your purpose statements. Remind yourself of why you're investigating the problem. What intervention are you going to do to address the problem? Look at the research questions. What questions do you intend to ask? And remember, it is all about alignment. All right. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to your dissertation journey.